Welcome to the Women in ERP podcast. I'm your host, Abigail Ullman, the founder of the Women in ERP platform. Joining me today is my co-host, Stephanie Poor. Stephanie is a sales manager for ERP vendor IFS and a huge advocate and champion for women working in and around ERP technology. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Abby.
We're joined today by Kayleigh Brown. Kayleigh is an independent IFS consultant. Hi, Kayleigh.
Hi.
It's about time we had you on the show.
I know, I've been really looking forward to coming to see you. Been really looking forward to it.
It's good. It's going to be an entertaining one, so buckle in. Which is a lot of fun. So first of all, let's just get straight into it. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to the world of ERP?
Yep, so I come from a tiny little pit village on the Northumbrian coast. I've been married for 10 years. I've got an 11-year-old. I got into ERP as a client. So I worked for a company that implemented IFS a few years ago. I was seconded to the project team to help implement the system sort of group-wide. And from there, I got offered some work in Switzerland, and that's how I got into independent working.
Oh, so you set up your own company in order to contract, basically.
That's right, yeah. And I've done that ever since. So that's a few years ago now.
Brilliant. And how do you find working in the sort of consultancy field as a woman? And how do you get your work?
I get my work, a lot of the time it's via IFS or Arkwide now. So I work directly on IFS-led projects most of the time. So off the back of one project, I'll be positioned into another one. I suppose I've normally always got something lined up with IFS straight after the project I'm on. So that's sort of how it's worked. I haven't really struggled. I've been really lucky, to be honest, because I know a lot of people have gaps in their work or have weeks where they've only got, 1 or 2 days, but I've not struggled so far, touch wood.
You're in demand.
Booming marketplace out there at the minute, isn't it? There's almost so much demand that actually, there should be a continuous stream of projects, hopefully, which it sounds like for you there is, for the good consultants particularly. But that's positive.
If I behave myself for the next few weeks, the next project lined up.
So how do you juggle being an independent consultant and essentially a working mum?
Wine, mostly, and it costs us a fortune in gaming credits. But to be serious, I'm really lucky. I'm surrounded by a fantastic support network. David's always been a huge supporter. He's done everything. He's been man really for the past few years, Monday through Friday. Family, friends help out, and I'm really lucky in that sense. Sometimes it's hard for Isla, the age she's at now, that I'm away. I think she was more or less used to it before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then having me around all of the time sort of flipped it on its head a little bit. And she struggles a bit more with it now. But I think because she's 11, she's getting to that age where, you need your mum for certain things. And but I do juggle it, and it just means that on a weekend, we try and have as much fun as possible.
That's it. Work hard, play even harder.
Oh, yeah.
You've also got a fair few pets. This is how we sort of got talking, didn't we? Why have you got so many?
Because I can't say no. I've got a problem with saying no. I've got a dog, 2 cats, a huge fish tank full of fish, and I've got 30 plus birds in an aviary.
What? That's cool. I wasn't expecting that bit. I was like, dog, cat, 30 birds.
It's a bit of a menagerie, to be fair. It's easy because cats don't want your time. They just want your food. The dog, make it up to him by taking him camping in the van. So he loves being when I'm away. He loves being with his grandma and granddad. So he goes there through the week sometimes and gets plenty of walks and treats, and so nobody really suffers.
So leading on to the van then that you're in right now, you're away from home a lot, and this is how you spend your time at the office. You stay in your van. So do you want to tell us a little bit about sort of being away from home and why you choose to stay in the van?
Yeah, sometimes I do stay in hotels if I have to. I prefer to be in the van. I find that it's a home from home. It's got everything I need. And it's not as though I'm sort of wild camping at the sides of roads and things like that, which I think that's the first thing that comes into people's heads. Like, what, just like in a motorway lane somewhere camping out? No, I go to nice sites where you've got really good facilities. Sometimes they've got spas even. It just means when I finish work, I can go into a space that's mine and it's personal, and I can go for walks. I get out in nature, and if it's raining, I've got Netflix on my telly, so it's not bad at all.
I love that. It's your home from home, like you say, because it is hard when you're on the road the whole time and you kind of, you're going from one hotel to the next, and to begin with, you're like, oh, this is good, and then by the end, you're just like, I'm just done with this.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas you have that familiar surrounding that actually it keeps that consistency, if that makes sense. I think that's such a good idea.
Yeah, the novelty of hotels quickly wears off.
Absolutely.
I am a sociable person, but sometimes I just think, you're in hotels, you're limited as to what you can get in restaurants to eat, and you're sort of making small talk with people. Just, it's sort of unnatural for me. I would much rather have my own personal space. I do like the hotels every now and again, and if it's really, really cold, I'm a bit of a wuss, and I will revert back to the hotel, but no, I do enjoy it, yeah.
It looks like a very fancy van, though, in fairness. So I'm sure you've got all the mod cons.
It's not bad. It's got a microwave. It's got a fridge. The fridge, incidentally, fits a full crate of Moretti very nicely. It's a bit of
I love that you know that.
Yeah, like it's like a Tetris situation going on. It fits perfectly. So little known fact there, but yeah, it's fancy. It's lovely. I'm really lucky to have it, to be fair. And it's red and black. We're Man United fans, and it goes with everything that's in the house. So
How do you keep safe on campsites? I mean, as a woman going out into the remote locations where it might be, truckers and all sorts.
I'm scarier than the truckers, believe me. Safety comes first. I'm in a lot of groups on Facebook with like-minded women who do the same thing. There's always a risk. I think as a woman, it's a different experience when you camp on your own and you're on the site. There's ways and means you can sort of protect yourself. I guess it's just anytime you sort of need advice, I've got that group to refer to, and just making sure that your doors are locked. You're not just sort of leaving things open. And I do talk to strangers, but I am probably the scariest stranger on those campsites. So all's good.
Brilliant.
When you say the home from home, so what sort of touches do you have in the van that sort of make you feel at home and that kind of thing? What do you bring with you?
God, good question. So I've always got, it's a bit of a trend with camper van folk to have a coat that's like, how do you describe it? It's called a dry robe, and it's a fleecy coat that's waterproof on the outside. And it's the best thing since sliced bread, it keeps you dry, it keeps you cozy. So I like to be comfortable. I've also got Star Wars bedding, so that's a nice touch that I added. But I've got my little TV. I always bring sort of books, and I've always got certain things I like to watch, but I always bring my trainers so I can go for a walk as well. So it's all about personal touches. I do sort of like to bring my nicest pajamas and my fluffy socks and things like that. So it's just sort of keeping it, like you say, home from home.
And do you find that being in a van makes you get out more in nature after you've finished a shift at work and you're home? Do you get out and walk a lot and explore the areas that you're in?
Yeah, I tend to look for sites that are close to either nature reserves or country parks, places where you can just go out and have a wander around. And I'm currently working near Glasgow, so I'm really lucky that there's a lot of nice lochs where you can sort of park up and go for a wander. But it does encourage you to get out more, I think, purely because you're in such a small space. To just go back as if you would sit in a hotel room, you've got more space, but it's boring. Being in a smaller space encourages you to actually either, sit outside or go for a walk. And another thing that people sort of who stay in their vans do is they join a gym and use their facilities as well. So there's a chain of gyms that I joined that you can just sort of go wherever you are in the country. And I'll often do that just because then you've got, the nice showers and things you can get a workout in. Sometimes I do shake the exercise side. I'm not going to lie.
Finding a hot tub.
Yeah.
I love it. It sounds so idyllic. It really does.
I also love that there's a whole community of women that you're all like talking to, because it's actually so obvious when you think about it, but it's just a world I don't know. So it's like, oh yeah, okay, you kind of all got each other's backs. I love it.
It's cracking because there's a whole raft of women out there who, dress up in their suits through the day and then get in their joggers and their hiking boots on at night time. And that's exactly me.
I love it.
That's who I am.
Great. So going back to work then, one of the things that we spoke about were sort of conflicts at work and challenges that you faced throughout your career. So have you encountered any friction in the workplace?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I think just nature of projects is that they can be stressful. When the chips are down, there's a lot riding on the success of projects, and it's so easy for people to get stressed out, to burn out even, and that does cause conflict, especially on projects where it's getting close to the wire and it's a tricky time. It's so easily done, and you've just got to try and sort of stay professional when that's going on.
Yeah.
But it's about being resilient. I've been in projects where people have struggled with the workload and getting the balance right. And that's really typical of projects. Yeah. So I have seen conflict, and it's not uncommon, I think, in projects.
It's not. And some of us, me included, let our emotions get the better of us sometimes. And how do you handle this sort of when you're in a male dominant environment?
So I think the whole thing about resilience, I'm not a naturally resilient person. And I think often when you receive criticism and it's done in what can come across in a male-led industry as being a bit patriarchal and a little bit sort of in your face, I think you've got to just assume that most people are acting with the best intentions and that, the feedback's necessary as long as it's done right. I think resilience and emotion, it's about, you take pride in your work. Pride's associated with emotion. And when you feel like somebody's attacking that, it is easy to sort of get emotional about it and feel like you're getting upset about it. It's not always a reaction you want to have because it's not useful to the situation. The way that I've dealt with it in the past is by contacting, I've got a mentor. I'm really lucky actually to have a mentor who I talk to whenever I face a new situation. I don't know quite how to deal with it. Just a little shout out. It's Sid Niven. He runs the Northern Growth Academy. I met him through my qualifications a few years ago, and I go back to him quite often on situations where I want to learn how to deal with things in a professional, but in a way that protects myself mentally as well.
Yeah.
Sid introduced me to Havening actually. So Havening as a therapy, it helps you to deal with a traumatic situation, but gives you the tools to be able to deal with the same situation again. And it's to do with touch and feel. So, if you're in a tricky situation, once you've completed this therapy, even just sort of, gently rubbing your hands together and touching your face, that sort of thing, it's all connected. There's loads of studies on it. It's amazing. But it just gives you sort of a relaxed feeling that allows you to take the emotion out of the situation and just deal with it properly.
Yeah. So is it a bit sort of hypnotism, or how do they do that?
It has been associated with hypnotism, but it's more of there's an actual physical change that happens. So I'm not great at explaining it, but I try and sort of follow the way that Sid taught me, is that there's parts of your brain in the amygdala part of your brain that when you've felt trauma and you've gone through something that's affected you mentally, the surface changes. So if you feel like, you've got a flat surface, nothing's happened, the minute you go through a traumatic situation, the surface starts to change. And the way Sid described it is that if you imagine tiny little sort of fingers on the surface, what Havening does is it's the smoothing of that surface, so that if you go through something that is similar to that situation again, it's not going to bring forward those feelings that made you feel emotional and upset. It's just kind of restructuring that surface so that it's a clean slate.
Yeah,
more or less, and you're better prepared then to deal with the situation again. It's amazing, and I would encourage anybody to look it up. and even looks it up. You know, it's helped me massively, and I know it's helped some of my friends as well. And in particular, you know, things like phobias. So that's why I think it's associated a bit with hypnotism, is that people use it for phobias, and it's incredible actually how it works. I'm a total psychology nerd though. I'm really into behavior and psychology. That's one of my my sort of personal interests. So all that stuff really sort of it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's always good to have useful tools when in that sort of a hotbed environment, but it is kind of like that, isn't it? But it's quite touchy.
It does get like that, yeah. And I mean, one of my habits that I've got is when I start a new project, I spend time building personal relationships with the people that I'm working with, so that in those situations, I find it easier to deal with then, because I know how to get onto that person's level and speak to them in a language that they're going to hear, and actually sort of reduce that bit stress. I read up on things like transactional analysis, which is understanding why people act the way that they do in terms of conversation backwards and forwards. And I think it just understanding behaviour helps my resilience, because it not justifies people's behaviours, but it helps me to understand why people act the way that they do, especially in high pressure situations.
Yeah, it allows you to, I guess, rationalise it and break it down and work with it ultimately.
It does. And I mean, once you've got a personal relationship with somebody who you're working with, it's easier to go, hey, pack it in, behave yourself, you know, come on, and be a bit cheeky. I once actually had somebody ask how I say the same things as them, but I get away with it. And I joke that it's the Geordie accent, you know, you can get away with murder if you're speaking a Geordie accent. But it's nothing to do with the accent really. It's just the fact that if somebody's got confidence and trust in you, that it's easier to speak.
Taking the time to get to know that is so important. Relationships are so important. Just understanding how people tick.
Absolutely.
So what would you say makes a good project team? What personality traits or characteristics would make a good project team, in your opinion?
I tend to gravitate towards people who are open and honest. Foremost, I think there's nothing that grounds a project quicker than hiding things and not being open about the situation if you need help and asking for it. So people who aren't shy to ask. There's a Geordie phrase that I love saying it because everybody's confused by it, but it's shy Ben's getting out.
Say that again. Shy Ben's getting out.
Okay. Shy Ben's getting out. Yeah, so your Geordie listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about. But the gist of it is that shy children get nothing. So if you don't ask, you don't get. I think confidence is important on a project, to have your voice and say what you really sort of think and need and feel on a project. And I just think as well, having a little bit of humour there helps. Being human, you know, we're all humans on a project. I think often we forget that we're not actually machines. We're implementing systems, but we're not a system. So just being a human, basically, I think.
Do you think having a good leader or project manager is important, and what characteristic traits in a leader is of benefit?
I think leaders who show you trust and give you a bit of autonomy. I always work better with project managers who let me do things my way. I think micromanagement is one of the first things to kill a good vibe in a project. I think just trust and people who support you, and you know that if there's something that you need to talk about, you can just go and talk to them without the feeling of being sort of criticised or having backlash. I think just genuinely nice people. I've dealt with some fantastic project managers in the past few years, and the good ones tend to be personable people, really genuinely nice people.
It's so interesting to talk to you about this. A lot of the work that I've done in the past has been around, putting project teams together, and sometimes it's about who's cheap and who's available, and and just ticking the boxes of who they need. And actually, when you think about it, that doesn't make a team. It's really hard to get that vibe, I guess, to make that project successful. And I guess that's where lots of problems stem from. So how can an organisation ensure that they're getting people that work well together?
Again, I'm a big fan of psychometric testing and the psychology behind how a team ticks. And I think, have you heard of Myers-Briggs?
Yeah.
And the 16 personalities. So that for me in the past has helped me to pull teams together where you've got one of each type of person in a team, and you haven't got a whole load of leaders that are just going to clash. I think it's got to be a good balance of people who can manage and lead and people who can actually, get together and get the job done. I think it's more to do with personality and less to do with skill.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think skills obviously important, especially on ERP projects, because it would be daft to take someone who's never touched a computer before and put them in a developer role. You know what I mean? They've got to have the skill that some developers that I've worked with, you'd think they hadn't touched a computer. I'm just cheeky. But I think it's more to do with how people gel. For me, that's more important than actually having the top person for this thing. I think you can be incredible at your job and still be an arse, so
it's where diversity comes in, doesn't it, in terms of whether that's women or different ethnicities or whatever. I think it's just so important. If everyone's the same, it's just you get the clashes, like you say, and it's just a bit dull, if more than anything. We spend so much time working, we've got to be in an environment that's welcoming, nurturing, challenging in certain ways. So I completely agree with you.
And how do you ensure a successful handover then when a project's finished? Is a project ever finished?
I was on the tip of my tongue.
For me, it's about ownership, client ownership, and them actually accepting the solution as their own, and they've made their decisions with guidance, but it's theirs, it's their baby. And I think just understanding how to firefight even thereafter. So you go live and you find things. I think a lot of people feel as though they should go live with a project and that everything will be perfect, and how often is that the case? It's given them the tools to be able to fight fires afterwards for the first few weeks, I would say. Rather than giving them what looks like a perfect solution. You're always going to find things because you can't test everything. And I find myself saying that quite a lot. I'm working as a test manager at the moment, and it's human nature to think we must test every single variation on a scenario. You'll never test everything, otherwise your projects would last 20 years, So I think definitely ownership, but more so giving them the tools to be able to deal and cope, and just keeping it positive as well. I mean, you've got to pick people who are going to go out into the business after you've gone live and actually be the cheerleader for that solution. It's making sure that when you hand over, you're handing over to people who are actually really positive about the product.
Yeah, and capable. So to anyone that's considering becoming an independent consultant, what advice would you give them?
Buy a van.
I love that.
I would
put shares in a van company.
I would say, build up your resilience, because being independent isn't always easy. It's nice to have the freedom that comes with being an independent contractor, but actually you are on your own for a lot of it, and you've got to make the decisions that are right for your own business. And it's sometimes easier to strike up a work-life balance when you're working for yourself, but you don't actually switch off when it's your business. So it's just making sure that you're resilient enough to be able to sort of deal with, family, as well as making sure that the business does what it needs to do and functions properly. That does boil down for me to resilience again.
Do you think that work-life balance is ever really achievable?
I think work-life balance means something different to everybody. For me, it means, I'm away quite a lot and work long hours, but actually I go on holidays that are amazing. We've just come back from Florida. That's my balance.
Yeah.
And I think some people do struggle with that. I would say people who are struggling with balance to really just stop and take stock of where you're at. Maybe make some lists, of how you would prefer things to be, and then make it happen. I think balance is never going to be like that. It's always going to be slightly one way or the other. As long as it's not that. So as long as it's not a huge gap and tipping one way, really heavily. I think some days you have good balance and some days you really don't. But you've got to take the rough with the smooth when you're independent. Probably just as much as you would if you were employed.
Yeah, true. You're a very positive person, which is lovely, and you laugh a hell of a lot and you find humour in everything. Do you think that sort of positive mindset has been pivotal in your making a career and being as successful as you have been?
I think it has, because I think if you can see light in a situation, you're not often sort of bogged down by things. I have got a bit of a cheeky sense of humour, and it's been noted a few times, but I'm literally just the most sarcastic person on the planet. So it works well with some people and not so much with others. But I do think having a sense of humour and laughing about things, just in general, if you can't laugh at yourself sometimes, I think it just makes things a whole lot harder. I'm constantly messing something up and laughing at myself for it. You know, it's just part and parcel of life. I think just can't take life too seriously, you know.
Yeah.
It's I think it's been the way I've been brought up as well, though. I've been brought up around some very strong female characters.
Yeah.
And in our family, if you can't take a mocking, then you're in trouble, you know. It's like a comedy roast every time my family gets together, so
I can relate to that.
Yeah, it's, you know, you've got to laugh at life, because none of us know if what we're doing is right or wrong, you know.
Do you know what? Like, I had one situation where I know lockdown was just so tough for people, and that was a tricky one for finding the humour. But I was in a remote test during lockdown, and it was a really sort of tense few minutes. Something had gone completely wrong in the test, and it was panic stations. There was silence, and it was just a really awkward situation to be in, especially that we're all behind screens, you know. And no sooner had the tension hit sort of peak when Isla flung the door open and announced really, really loudly that the dog had kicked poo on her jumper. And the whole test just burst out laughing. Everybody was in stitches. And then, because everybody had just sort of gone and deflated a little bit, we managed to get through it and we got it all sorted. But I think it was just in that moment, everybody was like, oh, really tense.
Yeah.
And then, because this child had walked in and announced that, yeah, the dog, she'd been playing with the dog in the garden and was now covered in muck. Yeah, that was a good one.
So much humour in them. It's great. No, that was a lovely conversation, and I think we can all take so much from that in terms of being positive, even on really trying and testing days, which I think we've had a few of them recently. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Kayleigh.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having us, and I hope to catch up with you at some point soon. Have to get together and have some drinks or something.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Thanks, Kayleigh.